And we are live. If you live in this solar system, there is simply no one better to talk to about Apple and specifically WWDC than my guest today. And that's why this is the second time I've had him on the show to talk about Apple and then WWDC. So I think next time we might have to take him out of that box a little bit. But this time we are indeed talking WWDC. Rene Ritchie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's amazing that you are here. It's amazing. You're so awesome, and you like still give me the time of day, and that's amazing.
No, I love no, not at all. This is fantastic.
Well, I mean, for the longest time, my Twitter profile said, "Yes, I will go on your podcast." So, I mean, you're kind of the same thing. You move around a lot, so I like it. I like it. But you are crushing it as an independent creator. I love watching your stuff. I love, following you on the Twitters and all that. And we will get to all that, near the end of the show. But today we are talking WWDC, which this time, just this one time for you, I will call Dub Dub.
Oh, it's so I when I say WWDC, I fall all over myself. It's like one of those words where the initialisms are longer than the actual words.
Right.
And so when you go there, like they've all gotten tired of it. They've been doing the show for 30 years. So they just all say Dub Dub. And then like it's much less error prone.
That's fair. That's fair. And side note, which I would cut out if I were doing a shorter video of this, but I'm not doing a shorter video of this. But side note, I have never been able to call my parents' siblings uncle or aunt anything. It was just always by their first name. Okay. And the one time I tried, it was my Uncle Gary, and I tried to say Uncle Gary, and I said, "Oh, hey, how you doing, Uncle?" And it didn't work. So anyway, so that's why everybody in the world calls it Dub Dub except me, and that's okay. I am
it's just Apple nerds, and then everyone laughs at us when we do it. But like if you have to say it often enough, you just fall right in.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, so, and I've only been doing the show for a couple of years, so give me a few more years. Maybe I'll be on the Dub Dub train. You never know. Anyway, so WWDC was a massively long. It was like 2 hours, wasn't it? Like the whole thing from start to finish?
In the Cupertino sun.
Yeah, and that you were actually there. That's right. I forgot about that, which I thought was actually really fascinating. That they invited people to Cupertino, and then they showed you like a 2-hour YouTube video.
Yeah,
which I thought there was like no stage. So I mean, let's talk about that. The in-person experience. You tweeted early on that they weren't letting you bring in any cameras larger than a phone. Is that right?
Yeah. So I think one of the issues was that it was a hybrid event, and if Apple has to pay attention to everything that's happening in the community. And my guess is they didn't know if they'd actually be able to pull it off. Like they probably figured they couldn't do a normal event because it would be just too problematic. But then as the caseloads would rise and fall, they're like, okay, we can do, we can't. And the reason it was all, live to tape was because they might not have been able to do it at all. If cases had gone up high enough, they would have had to cancel the in-person portion. And then they need that video to play.
What are you going to do, right?
Yeah. But likewise, like Apple security doesn't allow cameras into Apple Park. That's just like a standing rule because, there's a lot of sensitive trade secrets in Apple Park. And they had a bunch of YouTubers coming, which is not normal. And I think it was hard for them to turn that giant ship and say, no, like this person, just to figure out the logistics of this person is a YouTuber. They can have a camera. This person probably works for, a company that we shouldn't allow in with sensitive video recording material. So it was a lot of overhead for them to try to, it was the first time. So there was a lot of stuff that had to be done.
Yeah, I get that. Totally get that. But I just thought it was a little funny. I'll be honest.
Yeah. And also Dub Dub usually doesn't take place at Apple. It takes place at McHenry in San Jose where they don't care what you bring in because it's a civic center.
Right, exactly. This is a public venue. Go ahead, take picture of the walls or whatever you're going to take a picture of. Yeah. But so anyway, I thought that was interesting. What was the in-person experience like? Like, how many people were there all told? Because I know a lot of people went.
Yeah, so typically it's around 5,000 developers and 1,000, media analysts, that sort of thing. And they don't have room for that capacity at Apple Park. They did build a brand new developer center right outside the ring, across from the visitor center. And I think they had around 1,000 developers there and probably 300 media or so. But they were like, there was an abundance of caution going on. You had to have a negative COVID test within 24 hours of every day that you went there. You had to have an N95 or equivalent mask on. Most of it took place outdoors. You could take your mask off if you were outdoors and away from, more than 6 feet away from somebody. But with the ebb and flow of the crowd, that just wasn't a practical thing.
Right.
So most people just I'd say 99% of people just had them on all the time, which I liked because I have not traveled in 2 years. And I was worried because we saw GDC where there were like super spreader events and then people on Twitter saying, I tested positive, but I went anyway because I didn't want to miss out, which is like just the worst humanity.
Let me guess. American media, right? Be honest.
Maybe. I don't know. I honestly don't know what the spread is for GDC, but there was a couple events and there was PAX and, and they'd gone. And if Apple screwed this up, it'd be like an Apple level headline.
That's true. Now, to be fair, I did go to the NCAA championship game, and that was my first super spreader event. I was very excited to go. I was one of, conservatively, out of 70,000 people, maybe 50 masks that I saw the entire day. Yeah, so it was Louisiana, so it was in the South. Anyway, but that's fine. So
even our friends at Creator Clash, a bunch of YouTubers went to watch Dr. Mike and iDubbbz box each other, and there were no masks, and they all got COVID. So I mean, it's you got to be careful.
I survived my super spreader event. I'm happy about that. So anyway, so let's get into the meat of the show itself. They started off with iOS because they started talking about the lock screen, and arguably I think the lock screen is the biggest announcement to come out of iOS. And I have to admit, it's actually really kind of impressive what they're doing. So just to kind of recap, they've got a new lock screen where you can put in, whatever picture you want, but then you can actually kind of sort of put in I don't remember what they call them, but they're basically widgets where you can have the time, and you can have your rings, and you can have now the music playback and the media playback controls. That is something that's automatically added towards the bottom of the lock screen. I don't think that's something that you add. Am I right?
Okay. Yeah, that's opportunistic.
But the really cool part about the lock screen, I mean, and this is such a nerdy thing to nerd out over, but the really cool part is if you have a picture of a person, or presumably, does it work with buildings? I'm assuming we'll get into that in a second, but but if you have something very prominently in the foreground, in the example they used, it was a person, and you put a clock above their head, and part of their head was covering the clock. Instead of the clock covering the head actually covers the clock. So Apple is using some machine learning to figure out, this is a prominent foreground object, this should go over the clock. And I'm gesturing and putting my hand in front of the microphone. I absolutely should not be doing that. But anyway, it's just kind of cool because if you move the head up, it obscures more of the clock, and it's really neat. Now, does that work for inanimate objects like buildings or something like that? Have you tried that out?
I don't think so. I think what they're actually doing is using the depth map. So it has to be a portrait mode photo, and then the portrait mode, especially if you have a LiDAR camera, but even not if you have a depth disparity camera, they do it with the focus pixels, it'll know what's in the foreground. Then it'll have a map of depth behind it, and it'll use that in a combination. They're not quite as good at it as Google is, but they also do a very good job of the depth just separating forms algorithm. I forget what it's called. The map that does that, and they'll combine those two things, sort of give you as clean a cutout as they can.
It's really neat. It's really neat. And the effect is it's one of those little subtle things that you probably wouldn't notice unless someone pointed it out. If you're at a party and you're like, hey, here's my lock screen, you probably wouldn't notice it unless they see how the head is in front of the numbers here. Then they'd be like, oh yeah, that is kind of neat. So I really dig that because, Apple didn't have to show it off. And let's face it, to 99% of the consumers who are going to buy an iPhone, they probably did not watch WWDC, so they're not gonna specifically have it pointed out to them.
They can pull views though. I mean, a lot of event views are down, but Apple still manages to pull big numbers when you consider YouTube numbers are huge, and then they also stream it on all their own devices, and a lot of mainstream people just watch it on those. The thing that I really like, though, is that some years, often actually, Apple announces something new, like the widgets, which are based on the Apple Watch complications. They'll announce those, but they'll be Apple only for a year because they always like to dog food and see what the problems are before developers hit them. And then the next year, it becomes open to everybody. But almost everything was it's coming to Apple, and there's widget kit for the widgets now. Everything was an API. Everything was a framework. Everybody can use it. And I love that as just a trend for the show.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, now that you mentioned that, I mean, you're obviously a lot more insider than I am, so it's cool to have that perspective. That yeah, because almost everything that they announced, they followed up with. By the way, here's a developer kit.
Yeah.
And that included the weather, that included
Yep.
maps, that included probably the stage manager. Did stage manager have a development kit? Or no, the collaboration
Yes.
had a developer kit. Yeah, so you're right, like everything had a developer kit. Good note. That's why we have
Yep.
Rene Ritchie on the podcast, folks. uh but
I'm just
but
looking for changes. That's why my algorithm is programmed to see delta changes in shows.
Right, right. They also had a couple of fairly minor tweaks for messages. You can edit
Yeah.
messages and you can recall messages now. And
Within it, so this, I'm curious for your opinion on this because this ended up being a bit controversial. People have
really,
been asking for the ability to recall messages and mark them as unread for a long time. So you can
hmm
mark messages as unread, but it's within a thread. And also, the delete and edit only works in a 15-minute window. And so some people are saying that's not good enough. I want to be able to always delete or always edit my message. And then there are a bunch of lawyers saying, don't enable this feature because it'll prevent your ability of submitting messages, into the court system, whether it's family court or contract law, those sorts of things. So like, I just
interesting.
thought it's a cool new feature, but apparently everything is a controversy in the 2020s.
Well, no, I mean, I can kind of see where they're going with it. Now, I definitely am on board with the 15-minute window because I mean that's been the default call for like Twitter edit messages
Yeah.
is give them 15 minutes because 9 times out of 10 if you're gonna want to edit a message it's gonna be because you typed and you said oh crap and then you
Yeah.
review it right away. And I think if you don't catch it in the first 15 minutes, maybe this is just the editor in me.
You're
If
saying
you
if
don't
you woke
catch it
up
in the first
sober the
15
next
minutes,
morning, for example.
right, then that's on you.
Yeah.
But no, I mean I think 15 minutes is a decent window. I would say even like 5 minutes is a decent
Okay.
window because typically if you're going to edit a message, it's going to be like I missed something right away, and so you want to pull it.
Yeah.
That's like half my tweets is I missed something, and like I didn't realize it until I actually pushed send tweet. And if it's a really egregious error, I'll delete it and resubmit it.
Typos get
But
so much engagement. Like if you ever want people to reply to your tweets, just misspell something. Doesn't matter what you say,
right,
what you do. All they care about is
right.
your spelling.
Oh my god, I thought I was the only one that noticed that.
No.
Good to know. It happens to everybody. But yeah, so I definitely think that 15 minutes is a very reasonable window. Let's see, what dictation. I mean, I
Yeah.
kind of yada the dictation because that's something I've been doing forever with like Google Assistant and even like Siri. Siri's been pretty decent
Well,
with dictation.
that's like one of my favorite parts too, because I mentioned this when Google I/O happened. Google I/O like spent a great deal of time announcing features that iOS users have had for a while, and WWDC spent a great deal of time announcing features that Android users have had for a while. And everyone gets all like aggro, like stressed about that. I love it because for me, like as an end user, consistency is a benefit. It's a feature, and
Oh
the
yeah.
more that I can have this stuff everywhere, like I don't care if it's a competitive advantage for them. They don't pay me. I just want the stuff
Right.
for me.
Right. Well, yeah, and I wrote an article that I still reference annually at Google I/O and WWDC. I almost always just retweet this article I wrote for Pocket Now back in the early days, 2014, I think. Everybody copies everyone. And
Yes.
and it's been my kind of my mantra ever since I wrote that. It's like, oh, it's fine that Google did this first. Now Apple users can enjoy it too.
Yeah.
And honestly, you go back far enough, everything came from WebOS anyway, so it doesn't really
I
matter.
think it was Nokia. I think Nokia invented everything in 1812 that was ever going to be invented.
That could be. That could be. I think. I
But
think
like
that
for me,
checks
it's
out.
like give us everything and then fight over how well you do it. Like the fight shouldn't be over whether you have it or not. It should be for the
hmm
best implementation of it.
Yeah, you don't have to be first. You just have to be best.
Yeah.
And see, that's why this podcast is so successful because I'm just the best.
Awesome.
And I'm only the best because I have the best guests. Anyway, so let's move on. They talked a little bit about Wallet. Now, I think the biggest standout for me with Wallet was the pay Apple Pay now, pay later thing,
Yeah.
which was really like it was really kind of cool. It was one of those things that you really don't think about. Like, yeah, I guess that could actually be really handy. And so basically the gist of it is you use Apple Pay, and now I didn't read the actual press release on this, and that's my bad, but that does not specifically have to be Apple Card. That could be any payment method that you're using with Apple Pay, correct?
I think like it's US only because like the US banking system is hyper competitive compared to the
Right.
world. But the
Right.
interesting thing too is that Apple is not partnering for this. It's not like they're bringing some financial institution or group in. They're using Apple, like Apple's big money bin to
Yeah. They're just
to
fronting
front
the
this.
money,
Yeah,
basically.
it's their cash. It's amazing.
Which is really cool. And so basically the gist of it is if you buy something, like a big ticket item, you can spread the payments out. I think it was 4 payments over 6 weeks or something
Yeah.
like that, which was, I mean, honestly, like kind of altruistic of Apple. Like, good on you, Apple. But I mean, obviously the caveat is you have to use Apple Pay, and Apple Pay
Yeah.
takes like a small percentage of every transaction or something like that, right? So
Yeah.
so Apple was sitting around trying to figure out, like, it's great that we get $1 for all these I'm trying to think of something, $50 or something, that for all these Xbox games that people buy. But what if we could get people to buy microwaves? Let's see if we can
Yeah.
figure it.
What if we could get $2?
Right. What if we could get $2? That would be good. So no, I definitely dig that. They rolled out driver's licenses for a couple more US states, which is cool. And that was really kind of what was the biggest takeaway from you for iOS? And spoiler alert, I'm going to ask you about this for every operating system.
Yeah, well, so it's going to be a little bit hard. Like, and Apple even admitted that because the lines between the operating systems aren't blurring in so much as what they do per device, but because they're all on Apple Silicon now and they all have the same foundations now, Apple, it used to take, I'm going to back up for a second. It used to be that a new feature would be announced for iOS and then maybe it would come to the Mac the next year or the year after. And now they've got everything on Apple Silicon. They've got everything on this shared, foundation for the operating systems. Everything is day and date. So like all the features they announced for iPhone, they also announced for iPad. So they announced for iPad was also coming to iPhone, and both of them are also coming to the Mac. So like a lot of those charts are, if not duplicative, it's just they picked which device they would announce it for.
Right.
But that means that like the highlight for me was more generic. It was that, Apple for the last few years also, they've announced these new features and then they've been delayed. Like things get, they're like iMessage Sync came out, I think 6 months late, 3 to 6 months late. And this year Continuity Control came out 3 to 6 months late. This year, they didn't say everything was coming in September. Even if we know it's not true, even if we know that finish line is just a motivator to get across it, they're like coming later. So for me, like the big sea change here was that they weren't talking about this monolithic release in the fall anymore, but about this roadmap for the next year. And that sets them up for, like, it may give them less motivation to get things done faster, but it also doesn't set them up for as much failure. And I think that's a really nice middle ground for them to be walking now.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's fair. That's fair. That's a nice politic answer. I love it. So let's transition on over. I think the next thing they talked about was it Watch or was it Ventura? I think it was Watch, right? Because they kind of Okay.
They went to Kevin.
Yeah, let's talk about
who did not dance this year. I was disappointed because he did that little dance for us when they added fitness workouts. So.
Oh, okay. I don't recall that, but we're going to go with it because you are Rene and you know all. So a lot of what they had to do with watches, man, the dogs. A lot of what they do with watches had to do with, like, health and fitness, which, I mean, that's kind of their bread and butter. But I mean, like, for me, the watch is all about the apps, but that's a different conversation. Yeah. Anyway, so a lot of what they talked about was like kind of workouts, and they did some, heart rate. Now, one thing they talked about was AFib, AFib detection. It seemed like that was much more aggressive, not like aggressive, that's not really the word I'm looking for, but it seemed like they were putting a lot of emphasis on AFib. Like, it'll be a little bit more obvious if you have AFib issues or something like. Let's outline that a little bit.
One of the problems, so Apple has been rolling this out over the few years. It's, atrial fibrillation, and they were looking for low blood pressure, high blood pressure, like a lot of different factors. But some of the feedback they got from doctors was that we don't know what to do with this. A patient comes in and they got an AFib alert on their watch, and what are we supposed to do? Like, it's great that they came in because, some people would have literally died. We see that in the news reports, would have literally died if they hadn't gone in. But
Yeah.
the doctors just see it as really random. So what Apple's trying to do now is keep track of it over time, so that if you do have an incident, you can go to the doctor, and instead of just getting this one-off alert,
it's okay, you're fine. Keep going.
Okay. Instead of getting like this,
push through, Rene. We can do it.
Instead of getting this one-off alert that they really know what to do, they have a whole rich history that they can go back over. So what they're trying to do is make it not only beneficial for emergency cases, but to make it more informative for doctors as they treat you over time.
Okay, so like if you come in, you say, my watch said I did the AFib thing.
Yeah.
The doctors are like, okay, well, that's normal. Everybody does that once a year. But if someone comes in and says, my watch says I did the AFib thing 87 times yesterday, okay, now we have a problem. Or like if you're exhibiting that type of alert on a more frequent basis than the average person, which not a doctor. I don't know how often we're supposed to be in AFib.
Or in post-care. Like they're trying to,
right.
Like you've had something happen and you're in post-care, and it's keeping track of it for you.
Right. So, and so, I mean, that's an important, like, trends. I think I think when it comes to health data, it's really all about the trends. And
absolutely,
so you need to keep that in perspective. So, they also did like a multi-sport workout. They showed off a multi-sport workout thing, which that's something thin people do. But that's good to know that you can do that. Like I said, with a lot of the fitness stuff, I kind of yada over it. So I'm just gonna. What's your big takeaway from the Apple Watch, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, there's two. One is that they're starting to get more aggressive, like you said, with their machine learning models. Maybe they're more confident in them. Maybe they've just gotten better in general. But they're determining, like what you just mentioned with the multiple workouts, they're getting much better at seeing, oh, your arm's moving this way and your leg's moving that way, and we can figure out what you're doing. But also the medication stuff, because that's been huge for a lot of people, just because there's so many and so complex, and some people aren't able to keep track of it themselves, or they have a caregiver, and just like the amount of it. And by no means do I there's a whole separate issue about whether we should be taking so much medication or not. But if you do really need to take it, it's nice that there's a facility in there that can, like, we all have Google assisted memory already. Our phones and watches are basically external cybernetics at this point. And if they can help do any of the mundane, tasks so we don't have to do them anymore, that's like, for me, that they're proving their value of existence.
And I think it's cool. I mean, I think the thing with the medications is it's a lot more proactive than I think at least I, as a user, want to be. Like, I don't want to, like, I'm taking my medication now. Now I have to do on my watch. So I didn't, I think there's a great way to do it, and I'm not positive that Apple's found it yet, but I think they're closer than anybody else. So that's
or you can turn it off. So it's like for me, I forget that stuff. Like I start editing a video, and then the day is over, and I have no idea. Right. I didn't eat, I didn't get up, I didn't do anything. So like the more I can have these sorts of reminders, like, hey, idiot, to continue to function as a viable organism on this planet, please go do X, Y, Z. I'm like, okay.
And hey, if it's one less Google reminder that I need, that's always nice, because I do have a recurring Google reminder to take my medication every night at 8 o'clock. So, but I don't have one for the morning, which I've discovered over the last couple of weeks I desperately need. Anyway, we should probably go ahead and move on. So we got some new hardware at WWDC, which is exciting. We got the M2. And we got the MacBook Air. And at this point, I'm kind of wondering, like, does anybody need anything more than the MacBook Air? Because it really is starting to seem like not so much.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like, there's two ways to advance a chipset. You have the generational improvements, which Apple has with like A13, A14, A15, or Intel might have with like 8th, 9th, 10th generation. And then you have the scale of it, which like Intel would have with like i3, i5, i7, i9, and Apple is doing with the base model, and then the Pro, the Max, and the Ultra, and that's just scaling cores. And so this one is a generational improvement, but they also snuck a few extra cores in. And to your point, one of the things they added are the media engines that they introduced with the iPhone 13, and then the MacBook Pro and Max models. So you have dedicated H.264, HEVC, and ProRes media engines. There's half as many as in the M1 Pro, a quarter what's in the M1 Max, but still, this is on a MacBook Air. So you now have the ability to render video, my guess, I haven't tested it yet, my guess is going to be 5 times faster, because previously all of this was CPU bound. So like it was just the limit of, and a lot of these small machines had these ultra low power processors that couldn't really handle intense video work.
Yeah.
But it improves my life, our kinds of lives in 3 ways. One is every time you move like an effect in a video editor, it doesn't beach ball. It doesn't like make you wait. It just works. And then every time you set a render to go off, it is like between 5 and 10, and on the higher end, 20 times faster. But also because the CPU is not doing it anymore, you can do other stuff. Like you can just say, go render, and it goes and does that. And your CPU is completely unencumbered.
Right.
Previously, you couldn't even use like Chrome very well when it was rendering. Now you can like run Photoshop and make your thumbnail or something. So it's like having a second computer ready and waiting for you. And that to me has been like the most transformative part.
That would be amazing. So 2 questions. First of all, did anybody think that the first It Just Works reference would be talking about CPUs? I did not. And second of all, have you gotten your new MacBook Air yet?
No, they're coming out next month. And the thing about like chipsets, though, is that they are unforgiving. You can send software patches forever, but if you screw up on the silicon, you're done. So they tend to just work better than any software. Atoms more than bits.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So I completely lost my train of thought there. So yeah, but I mean, like just the power that you're getting with the average MacBook Air these days is just. And like I have a Gen 1, an M1 MacBook Air that I got for actually both of my last 2 jobs. So, and I've been using that, and it's just like the native apps that are built into it are just like so insanely fast. And like now they're just really upping the game. And you're right, offloading the rendering and like all the graphical hardcore stuff off the CPU is going to be just that much more incredible. So that's
like, I don't know how geeky you want to get, but like we're gonna hit the
I
laws
can
of
get
physics
geeky.
soon.
Bring it.
Like there's we're shrinking down processes, and we're increasing power to a point where we're hitting the physical limits of our known universe. Like Intel's talking about angstrom level like transistors already, and that's kind of fantasy land at that point. But also it's getting to the point where Intel and Nvidia are so desperate to beat AMD on like these Reddit benchmark LARP competitions that they're throwing unbelievable amounts of power into their processors, to the point where like if you put the biggest Nvidia card and the biggest Intel card into a machine, it exceeds the voltage of a common house outlet. So you got to be the nerd who finds 2 different circuits at this, and that's not a consumer solution. So anything that we can do to move off the main cores, like let's stop worrying about the main cores so much and build these ASICs, like these reprogrammable ASICs and these off-core special silicon features, so that we can like let the cores just do their mundane work, but do things like accelerate video, put audio processors in there, do all these other exciting things.
I'm still waiting for a computer to come out with a dedicated Google Chrome processor, because I think really when you think about computing, that's what's really needed. So
it's the Chrome tabs. I use the Chrome tabs for battery and performance testing a lot, because every one of them is almost a full instance of Chromium.
It's insane. Like the one time I will like ultra nerd out when every time they have a hardware announcement, and I'm talking not Apple, I'm talking Microsoft and Dell and everybody, they'll always bring out like these huge these huge graphic rendering things, like look how quickly this computer renders this thing. I'm like, dude, open 6 Chrome tabs and show me how fast those load. Then we will have a conversation about performance, my friend.
I have like 3 Electron apps running, and I can see what that does to my performance curve.
Anyway, okay, but yeah, so we got M2 and we got MacBook Air, and they also announced a new MacBook Pro. Am I right about that?
Yes, I knew.
Yeah. So it was the 13-inch MacBook Air. MacBook Pro, excuse me. So I'll be honest, the hardware announcements kind of blended together for me. Yeah. So can you give us kind of like a real quick high level view as to what's coming with the MacBook Pro?
Yeah, so like this always sounds ludicrous to people, but it's really like how Apple works. Like they have very limited capacity. And people are like, they're the biggest company in the world, $3 trillion company. How can they have limited capacity? They deliberately keep their teams small so that they function like startups. That's what keeps them kind of nimble. So they don't grow their teams. They just spin off new teams. And the Apple industrial design department is famously small. And so they only have the capacity to redesign like a few devices. They're going to do the iPhone, of course. That's like the Taylor Swift product. It needs all the attention. But, they may not get to it. Like they might only be able to do 2 Macs in a year. So they're redesigning a couple this year. They're not redesigning the MacBook Pro. But what they're doing is they want people who are buying the Pro to still get the new chip. So all they did was like transplant the M2 in. So you still get the touch bar. You still have like the old screen, the old everything. But if you would normally buy a MacBook Air, it has no fan. So if you really do need to sustain a process for more than 20 minutes, for example, the MacBook Pro has a fan. So you're basically saying, I love something light. I love the Air. It's not like the new version's not ready yet. I just need a fan for now. I'll pay you an extra $100 for the fan.
That's kind of amazing. And everybody knows that most of Apple's staff is used to print their own money. So let's, we know where all their labor goes. So that's
well, I have this thing, like, so there's some people who get really angry when Apple updates a product. Like if you haven't updated in a while, you want Apple to update immediately, or any company immediately before you buy. But then the minute you buy, you don't want them to update again because you'll just feel like you've been obsoleted. Right. But I look at it like a bakery. A bakery has to have fresh bread. It doesn't matter what day I buy my bread. I might only buy it once a week, but every day I go in, I deserve fresh bread. I don't want to buy no stale bread. And I feel that way too. Like I feel like Apple and Google and Samsung, all these companies, the reason they put out new phones every year is not because they expect us to buy them every year, but they do understand that every year we buy them, we want a new phone. So I am like all in on keeping this stuff fresh.
See, I personally think that all those companies should just release a new phone every day. I mean, that's really the only solution when you really think about it. I mean, if you want
people involved,
if you want to have the freshest phone available, that's the only solution. But okay, so let's talk about macOS Ventura, and I think the headline here has to be probably Stage Manager, which is a new form of multitasking, which I'm not sure we needed, but we're going to go with it. Now, it is so like I can kind of see how Stage Manager works on an iPad, which, spoiler alert, is coming to the iPad. We'll get to that in a little bit. But I'll be honest, I'm a little hesitant as to how useful it's going to be on a MacBook. What are your thoughts there?
Yes, I mean, we're dealing with super mature operating systems. So it feels like a lot of the time when you get new versions of Windows or new versions of Mac OS, it's like arranging the deck chairs. They want to give us the semblance of change. Like a Simpson episode where like everything happens, but then at the end of the 30 minutes, it's kind of back to normal. So this, like, there's but everyone also works in different ways. So like some people do multiple spaces. Some people do, tons of overlapping windows. Some people who are way better organized than me, like having all their messaging apps on one display or one space and their productivity apps in another space. Mine is a jumbled mess. And I know even with this, it's going to be a jumbled mess. Like nothing is going to change for me because I'm not capable of change. But I think like for some people, depending on how your visual spatial orientation works, it's just giving you options. And we go through these every few years, like mission control and spaces and expose and all of these things. And some of them live on and some of them get murdered off, like dashboard is gone. So to me, this is like another experiment for them on their long journey towards how do we handle multi-windowing on not just like a big display world, but a multi-display world, which is a very small part. Like most mainstream people don't multi-monitor. It's like 10% of people, but it happens to be everybody on Tech YouTube and Twitter. And we complain about it constantly. So they're always trying to figure out new ways for us to use these giant things that we keep plugging in.
And for what it's worth, I actually do have all my messaging on one window, but that's all right.
Way better than me.
I'm not judging. I'm not judging at all.
You can judge me.
It's taken a long time to get there, but I think I actually got there, and I'm not 100% positive it's the best arrangement. But anyway, but I think also, like, I mean, to me, bringing Stage Manager to the Mac kind of makes sense. As we mentioned at the top of the show, the lines are kind of blurring in between the mobile operating systems and the desktop operating systems. So bringing Stage Manager to the Mac kind of makes sense when you also consider the fact that it's also coming to the other thing that is not a Mac. What's the thing that I'm talking about? The iPad. That's the one. Yes. Thank you. So, and then like the other kind of halo feature, I guess, if you want to call it this, is the continuity camera, which
Yeah.
is the ability to I guess it's Apple's tacit admission that their webcams actually do suck. So now if you really want, you can use your iPhone as a webcam for your Mac. And one of the cool things that they showed off was the ability to use your ultra wide camera to show your desktop almost as like a top down view. But so they use some AI, I'm sure, to like kind of straighten things out a little bit and adjust the perspective so it's actually correct. So when your hands come in from the bottom, even though your iPhone's on top of your phone screen, it's actually coming in from a top. I'm kind of curious as how that would work for me, just because I've got my laptop up on a stand and that's up on another stand. So like my desk and the top of my laptop are, hang on, I'll tell you in a second. The top of my laptop is 32 inches away from the edge of my desk. So I'm kind of curious as to how that would work.
Yeah, because you want to be careful, because like you want the desk shot, you don't want the stand shot or the crotch shot, and that's like a very small boundary point between those three things.
Yes,
so we're gonna have to see how that plays out. But it's an interesting use of computational photography, and I love that whole idea, because there's going to be some manufacturer who's going to come out with a literal camera on the side of the phone now, just to say they can do this better, which is going to be hilarious to me and wonderful at the same time.
Right.
But it's like using that ultra wide angle and saying we have so much more than we need. So we're going to crop down to a shot of you, and then we're going to use the bottom part, fold it up, and computationally straighten it so that it is giving you that top down perspective. I think it's a little showy offy in terms of like, hey, we have all this camera and computational skill at this point. But I also like this stuff because it's going to spur other people to do it, and we'll figure out all these. We already have like Center Stage, which is Apple's thing for. We're going to do the ultra wide, and then we're going to crop in and pan and scan around as you move, and then zoom in and out as more people come in and out of the frame. And all of this stuff is like, we want to show that the bits can do more than the atoms can. And some of them are going to be like, it's going to be the same as any product now. It's going to be goofy as hell. No one's going to use them. And some are going to be genius, and we'll wonder how we ever lived without them. The only way to get to the good stuff is to go through all this stuff on the way.
That's true. That's true. I mean, I personally am. I thought it was kind of cool when I first saw it. I'm not sure I'll ever use it, especially since my use of Mac OS and iPhone are fairly inconsistent, on a regular basis. But I mean, for someone like you, actually, I would kind of love to see a Rene Ritchie video demoing this, like doing like an unboxing or something, using the iPhone as a camera. That could be
like right now. I have a camera in front of me, and I have a camera mounted up there to do the same thing with two, dedicated cameras. So the idea of being able to do it in a hotel, if I needed to do like a podcast and demo something, or a meeting,
there you go,
and demo something, it could be useful. I'm going to keep an open mind.
I think we need to see a Rene Ritchie side-by-side comparison. Like, can the iPhone replace my camera setup?
Yeah, well, that'll do closer to release. Like, the thing is, like the beta period, everything is so not ready for prime time that I'd want to wait until. Like, I feel like once they ship it, then it's fair for me to be hypercritical about it. Like right now, I just file all the bug reports and say, I don't either like this is broken or I just don't like this, because the earlier you do that kind of stuff, the more time they have to actually fix it. And then once they release it, then they're fair game. I can
Exactly. So I will be watching for that video, and I know all of my viewers will be watching for that video as well. Am I missing anything from Ventura? I think that was really like the two main things, right?
I mean, again, they're getting everything that the iPhone and so like one of the things that I really like, and I know it's old hat to people on Android, is the ability to do live text, not just on photos, but on video. So, you can record a bunch of stuff, or you can pause a video that has like a bunch of code examples on the screen and just touch them and copy and paste them out. You should still do your own homework, kids. But I mean, like if you're watching a YouTube video, that kind of stuff, because it sort of liberates information. It's like a huge accessibility win for me. But also, a friend of mine was at the post office and was with the bank and had to send a bank draft and didn't have the address. And I only had a paper receipt of the address. I didn't have it in digital form, but I could hold my live camera view up to it and just run my finger across it, copy it, and paste it right in. And then, she just gave it to the bank. And that's the kind of thing where, again, the technology is helping us. And I think more like that, please.
Yeah, that is awesome. Did you see there was a report or I don't know if it was a report. It might have just been like a thing on Twitter, but there were like students in college that they're using their iPhones to
Yeah,
like capture the notes of like other students and like copy and paste them. I'm like, that's kind of funny. I love that.
yeah,
That's some good stuff.
some next
So
level cheating going on there.
let's go ahead and move on to the headline, the surprising headline I thought actually of WWDC, which was iPad OS. I don't know if that's the headline, but that's the last thing they showed, and typically
Yeah,
that's you don't play Enter Sandman at the beginning of the show because then everybody goes home.
yeah,
So
the
for
main event,
iPad
the
OS,
showstopper.
the showstopper indeed. So we got stage and it was kind of funny because like a lot of the iPad OS was like, hey, remember this thing we talked about 45 minutes ago? It's coming here
Yep,
too. Remember that thing we talked about an hour and 15 minutes ago? It's coming here too. So
yep.
like that was a lot of it, including stage manager on the iPad, which again I think makes a lot more sense on the iPad than on the MacBook, especially considering that now stage manager supports windowed views of apps, which I thought I honestly kind of thought I would retire before Apple ever went
Yeah.
to windowed views on an iPad. So that's kind of cool. And
Well, it's one of those
along,
things like Steve Jobs never wanted. Like he actually made rules that you couldn't even have them in apps. You couldn't have widgets or windowed views inside of apps. That's how sort of like he didn't want to have arrow keys on the original Mac because he thought lazy engineers would just port over their command line apps. He's like, we're gonna just lazy Mac developers are gonna just bring over their Mac apps, make them illegal. And so
is that a
now
thing? Okay. But all right, but yeah, so and also kind of along with that, with stage manager comes external display support for
yeah.
the iPad. Now I mean, you're Captain Apple, like we introduced you at the beginning of the show. How much do you think that's going to factor into your workflow, having like having an external display and windowed apps in on the iPad?
Like it's tailor made for me. Like again, like we represent maybe 10% of the market, a
Sure.
very loud
Yes.
10% of the market. Most people don't even plug their laptops into external displays, much less their iPads. And whenever I say that, people get so angry at me because we assume that any minority sufficiently vocal assumes they're a majority. It's just like how human brains work. But they don't. So this is very much a niche feature. But the iPad for all these years up until now had no concept of swapping pages of memory to drive. It was a
Hmm.
completely real-time operating, well, not in the classic sense of real-time operating, but it was a live operating system. And what would happen is as you launched more and more apps, they would just take over the memory. And if there ever got to be too much memory pressure, they would do something called jetsam. They would basically throw out the oldest and least used apps on the stack to free up memory for the most recent and newly used apps. And that's how they worked.
Right.
And that's why there were limitations to what they could do, but it also meant that they were incredibly responsive and incredibly available. And this is
Hmm.
a fundamental change. This is doing what the Mac has been doing, what Windows and Android have been doing for years. And that is allowing apps to exceed the maximum amount of RAM on the device, first through compression, then through very, very fast swap to
Hmm.
drive. And they have very, very fast storage controllers and NVMe SSDs to enable that. But you're still dealing with a somewhat constrained environment that people are used to having instantaneous response with. Like if your Mac is a little slow, you don't really notice because you're moving your mouse or trackpad around. But if you're used to direct manipulation, like just touching the screen and moving things, if it starts chugging or if you move and nothing happens, it just
Yeah.
shatters the complete illusion of
Oh yeah.
multi-touch experience. So it's still limited. It's limited to M1 Max because they have 8 to 12 gigabytes of RAM. The M1 has the advanced compression. It has the faster storage controllers and RAM. So they're keeping it. It's only the most capable iPads that can do that. The most recent Mac iPads Pro and iPad Air. But
Right.
for nerds who have been complaining that they want external monitor support, that they want multi-windowing, they now have that opportunity. Still limited
Hmm.
to like a collection of apps on your main display and a collection of apps on your external display, but way more than you've ever had the opportunity to do on an iPad before.
Yeah, which is huge. And one of the other things that they mentioned was this. Yeah, this was during the iPad part. Using virtual memory is
Yeah.
to use like part of your SSD as a sort of virtual memory. Obviously, nothing new, but the fact that you
Yes.
can do
New
it on
for
the
iPad.
iPad is new for iPad, exactly. And one of the biggest things, which I didn't realize was a thing, but apparently it's a thing, a weather app for the iPad. This is a thing,
Yes.
huh?
Yes, yeah. Famously, like it's like we have a lot of technical debt and we have a lot of like family debt in the world, and this is
Hmm.
one of those where originally they just brought over the dashboard widgets to the iPhone, and then they behaved terribly, so they had to rewrite them as native apps. But they shipped them, and then they went to make the iPad. And Steve is like, yeah, just blow it up. And they're like, we can't because you said that was stupid on Android. And also it's a waste of space. So we're going to make 2-column layouts. He's like, okay, fine, whatever.
Right.
But like they didn't have a good idea for the weather app or the calculator app or the clock app. It just looked like a blown up iPhone app, and the head designer at the time hated that, and Steve hated that, so they didn't ship it. And then over time, they were forced to add a calculator. That's right, they were forced to add a weather clock app, and now finally a weather app, especially because they bought Dark Sky, and it would look really really odd if they didn't have a weather app. But it still
Right.
it shows like one of the worst consequences of Apple's design led mentality sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. But we have it now, so that's great. Now, this isn't an iPad OS 16 exclusive thing, is it? Like, because just off camera, I searched for a weather app on iPad, and sure enough, there isn't one. So
Yeah.
like, when do we end? Did they didn't say anything about when this would ship or anything, or this isn't going to be an iOS 16 thing, is it?
So it might, because Apple doesn't really have a concept of arbitrary updates. Like they're working on it. This is the first year they're going to be detaching security updates
Hmm.
from their monolithic OS updates. But
Oh, okay.
they still don't have they still out of band. Like they don't just update the browser out of band or the mail app out of band. Google's very good at that. They pushed everything into the Google Play Store. Apple
Yeah.
needs to work on that. So like the new weather app is going to come with the new update. So it means
Okay.
that everyone's going to get it, except if your device doesn't run the new software version.
Interesting. Okay, so it's actually going to be an. Oh, okay. See, I'm so Googled. Like, I didn't even
Yeah,
think. Like, don't even think about triggering
I mean
Google.
they could, like
Anyway,
iWork. They have
but
is like anything that they think that they would get sued by regulators over, they put separately in the store, like iWork or things like that. So they could, but this just probably feels like it's part. The other really interesting thing, I love humans are so interesting. They at every WWDC, there's a bunch of people who are like, I can't believe Apple doesn't have a weather app or a keychain app on the iPad or something. And at the same time, I can't believe Apple keeps making these apps to hurt developers, to be anti-competitive with developers. So they're walking this line where this year there's no keychain app and people are upset about it, but at the same time, I'm sure 1Password and Dashlane and LastPass are super happy that Apple didn't
right.
make one of those.
Right. Although, I mean, for people like me who swap back and forth between operating systems, I don't really care about keychain.
Yeah,
I use 1Password. So, I guess all right. Anyway, so one last thing to talk about with iPad was collaboration. And
yeah,
so they announced these collaboration tools, which basically allows you to share basically Google Docs, an original document, where everybody can work on the Google on the, sorry, I shouldn't mix my metaphors here, where everybody can work on the original document and you can see like what people are doing in real time
yeah,
as they're doing it. Now, one of the cool things is, unlike Google Docs, is that you can actually do this share sheet, or you can do the collaboration through the share sheet. And if you have like a multi-person message or FaceTime call going, that's just like right there. You don't have to like
yeah,
individually add names or anything like that. So this would have been like, when I was working on the Google Doc with the XDA people, if I could have just gone to like, share, and then like seen a group message that I had with like a
yeah,
bunch of people in Slack, maybe I could have like done a collaboration thing. That would have been cool, obviously. And obviously that's not coming to, although maybe it will be, because Google did open up like collaboration tools, like
mhm,
as we mentioned earlier in the show, they opened up a APIs to collaboration. Now, I don't know if that's going to work for, like, obviously, a third party drawing app can add collaboration tools to its thing, but I don't know if a messaging app could add through that API like the ability to get like a group message from Slack or something like that.
yeah.
I don't know if it's going to work like that. We'll have to
We'll have
kind
to
of wait
see.
and see. But
Yeah,
regardless, if you have like a message going like with four people, you're going on vacation or something, then you could just like collaborate straight from the share sheet, which I thought was really kind of cool. And then they announced, they gave us a sneak preview of this Freeform app, which is
yeah,
basically like a boundless whiteboard where a whole bunch of people can draw and place pictures, and like it's basically just like a whiteboard. And they've got it looks like similar tools to what they have in the Notes app, for like pen and highlighter and stuff like that, and background colors, and you could do sticky notes and stuff like that. That was kind of cool by itself. I am very much not a boundless whiteboard person myself, but I know that there are tons of people out there that very much would love to use something like this. So that would be that. Those were like kind of the two cool collaboration notes that came out at in iPad OS.
Yeah, and like you said, it's nowhere nearly as rich as like Google or Microsoft. Those are their they're really good at services and at documents, those kinds of things. But the ability, Apple's really good at integration and packaging. That's sort of their forte, and making it so that you're in Messages, you're in FaceTime, you're in one of these things, and then you're just a couple taps away. You don't have to go in and laboriously add every single person to every single document through like the sharing functions, edit or non-edit, that kind of stuff. So it's nice. You won't be able to do as much, but you'll be able to do it much faster.
Yeah, exactly. And really at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. So I think we actually managed to sum up WWDC in less than an hour, which is amazing. I honestly questioned whether or not we were going to be able to do it, but
faster than they did by like twice.
I know, right? Yeah, we should do this for Apple.
We'll host next year. Craig can take a little break and we'll do it.
Yeah, call us Captain Hairspray. We'd love to do it. So like one big takeaway from WWDC, another year without a number row on the keyboard.
Yeah.
It's such a small ask. It's such a small ask, and come on.
But you got haptics. You did get haptics on the keyboard finally after like, I don't know how many years.
Wow. It just occurred to me that iPhones don't have haptics on
the do now.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's fun. Okay. I guess
maybe number row in another 12 years. We'll see how it goes.
I guess we'll take the win for that one. It's just, it's such a no-brainer in a world where like every password has to have uppercase and lowercase and numbers and symbols. How do you not have a number row? Because like everybody has to type in passwords, but I guess everybody has keychain now, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, so was there anything about WWDC that you don't think we covered? Because I think we were pretty comprehensive, right?
The only thing that I really liked, and it's going to be dependent on a lot of platforms, was the passkeys, because that's something that Apple's working on with Google and with Microsoft.
Yes.
And the more they can do to make sure that people don't use password as password or 1, 2, 3, 4 as a password anymore.
Speaking of password managers,
Yeah, like they can still manage your passkeys for you. I mean, that's great. We just won't have to worry about the passwords anymore.
Right. No, that is cool, and I look forward to a passwordless future. Because I was just moving my wife into a new phone the other day, and like, so for this service, your password's the same thing. Yep. Okay. So for this service, password's the same thing. Yep. Okay. So for this service, password same thing. No, capital first letter. Oh, okay. Nice variety there, babe.
Just in case Home Depot gets compromised again.
Right. And then I showed her, I'm like, by the way, this is what my average password is. And I showed her like one password. She's like, why would you do that? I'm like, why wouldn't you do that?
63 character pseudo random blob, please.
Right. Well, and that's why, we're going on vacation, and for United, United has your boarding passes on the phone. But there is no way for me to share my wife's boarding pass with her phone. So I have to log in to her United app so that she can pull up her own boarding pass. But in order to do that, I needed to do the share password thing from 1Password, because it's like 16 whatever. It might even be more than 16. I haven't even counted, but it's like a non-comprehensible like string of BS. So,
and I security questions are also pseudo random letters and numbers so that nobody can guess them based on your internet profile, and it just goes all the way down.
Yeah, and I have to do that for my kids and my mom too. So that's going to be fun. Anyway, so let's go ahead and wrap things up. And the last thing we do, and of course, because this is a podcast, the last thing we do is we roll out the red carpet for you, sir. So in the laughable case that somebody has heard of me but not heard of you, how would they go about finding your stuff on the internet? It's time for you to promote your stuff.
Oh, I am either remarkably consistent or remarkably boring, because I'm Rene Ritchie on. So like youtube.com/Rene Ritchie, twitter.com/Rene Ritchie, Instagram.com/Rene Ritchie. Just go there and I'll be there.
Rene Ritchie and And let me just make sure I'm spelling this right. Ritchie, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank God. I was
Good
really
Scottish Ritchie.
Oh, it's a Scottish Ritchie. Got it.
Yeah.
So all right, cool. And so you should go check him out. And for what it's worth, I miss the vector branding. I thought that was really
Yeah,
I
Mobile
thought that was
Nations
really
owns
cool.
that.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's all right. But you're Rene Ritchie because you
Yes.
are you and you are awesome. So go check
Nobody
out
can
Rene.
take your name from you.
That's right. Well, the U.S. government is trying, but anyway.
Okay.
But anyway, go check out Rene Ritchie's stuff. It is amazingly awesome, especially if you're in the Apple, category and you're interested in all things Apple. Rene Ritchie should be at the top of your playlist. But as for us today, that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. Please consider subscribing to this podcast if you enjoyed it. And if you really enjoyed it, I would love it if you would write a review for the show or comment down below, since this is on the YouTubes, and that's what they do on the YouTubes. If you want some early access, jump onto Patreon at patreon.com/benefitofthedowd. You can write to the show by visiting benefitofthedowd.com/contact. I'd like to thank Rene Ritchie for coming on and talking all things WWDC, and co-producer Cliff for all of his hard work behind the scenes. But most of all, and as always, I would like to thank you for listening and for giving us the benefit of the Dowd.